All right, everyone, we are the last panel of the night, so we'll keep it good and snappy so we can all have a good time with the rest of this conference. So just to kick things off, Marshall Kosloff, FAI, media fellow, host of the Realignment. We've got a great panel here. Let's just go down the line, introduce yourselves, and then we'll get to the actual questions.
Jamil, Jaffer, George Mason University, National Security Institute, and Paladin Capital.
Joshua Steinman, Galvanick.
Meg Reiss, founder of SolidIntel, Inc.
And founders from government, real quick, what were your roles before you got into this space?
I was Senator Romney's national security advisor.
4 years as a senior director on the National Security Council covering cyber, telecom, supply chain, crypto.
Bush Justice Department and White House, and then House Intel Committee, Senate Foreign Relations.
Cool. So the title of this event is Preparing for Multipolarity. I'm not quite sure what that means. I don't think anyone really knows what that means. So we're going to be kind of lazy here and ask each of you, starting with you, Jamil, to articulate what multipolarity means and if it's even a relevant concept and what should we exactly be preparing for.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you believe that we live today or lived for the last 10, 15, 20 years in a unipolar world where the US was a single global superpower, the question is, what does the world look like when we're not the only one, right? Is it bipolar? Is it bipolarity with China being the other big power? Are there other smaller powers that matter? Does Russia matter? How much does Iran matter? What about all these terrorist groups running around and all the proxy groups?
As we're thinking about multipolarity, we really are thinking about it in terms of authoritarianism versus not, and what that means for the rules of the road going forward.
Jamil, I like the prompt you kicked off with by just saying, who matters, who doesn't matter. So let's kind of go down the line. What matters? What's a country that matters? And what's a country that may fit into this frame that actually is way overrated in terms of how important it is to American interests, our overall dynamics, et cetera?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think everyone's said it. You've heard it all day. China's the one that really matters. It matters because of technology. It matters because of population. It matters because of capability and intent, and this authoritarian versus democratic dynamic. A country that I think matters a lot less but continues to make itself relevant because we allow it to be relevant is Iran. Iran should not be relevant to America's decision-making in the world, except to prevent it from doing what it's doing. The problem is, for the better part of now going on almost 2 decades, with notable exceptions like the killing of Qasem Soleimani, we've allowed them to run the tables on us. Right? And this has been true, by the way, not just of Iran, but it's true of Russia, it's true of China as well. We are not effective at deterring our adversaries from doing bad things because nobody believes us. No ally of ours today thinks we're going to be the fiercest ally they've ever had, and no foe thinks we're going to come at them hard. Because for the better part of a decade and a half, 2 decades, we've said, yes, we're a global superpower, but we're not going to behave like one. We might talk big sometimes, might talk quietly sometimes. We're never actually going to do anything to stop you from doing what you're doing, and our adversaries take advantage of that. And they take risks, and they act more aggressively, and we allow that and enable that to happen. And so Iran's an example of a country that should not be relevant, but we have made relevant because of our own ineffective behavior.
Josh, before you answer, let's just take it as a given that China is number one here. Number two, who's close up behind or distantly behind China in terms of mattering, and then get to the who shouldn't matter part of the question too.
I'm gonna pivot off that. So I think what I would say is China is essentially presenting alternate infrastructures of information transmission and control. And that's something that hasn't happened in a very long time. And through their economic policies, they're able to use those offerings to essentially bid to take over the layers that I was talking about in various places around the world, sort of outside the perception of this, nothing wrong with it, but just the current American foreign policy sort of mind share around the sort of military industrial complex. Again, I'm not even using that in a derisive way, but if you think about force projection, cost exchange ratios, status of forces agreements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, well, at the same time, if you've got, Huawei, Tencent, Weibo, all these companies coming in and offering to essentially give away 5G networks, cloud storage, enterprise software, all the way down cell phones, basically for free. Like, you essentially have an entity that is able to, at a structural level, at a digital level, at a financial level, like really shape a country in a way where the sort of like big ticket defense contract driven, foreign policy thinking almost becomes obsolete, because at a time and place if you're choosing, you essentially can, flex that civilization, flex that country in ways that, an AIM-9 never would be able to.
And Megan, feel free to pivot as Josh did, any direction you want.
Can you repeat the question you asked
basically,
before?
What matters and what doesn't matter. Actually, no, Josh, I'll follow up though. What doesn't matter as much as we would think in the conventional wisdom sense?
Ooh, in big picture thinking, but within the China context, as well as some of the other adversaries, we have to make strategic decisions about our interests, right? And so when we do that, we should see where things are happening in ways that lead to corruption and lead to failure points for our adversaries and kind of step out of the way. There's one country in particular I'm thinking about, but China has a strong relationship with this country, is investing a lot in this country. There's tons of corruption, tons of nefarious stuff going on. I'm talking about Pakistan, guys. And honestly, we probably don't need to fight them investing in it that much, because honestly, it may not lead to a lot of gains for the Chinese to really be good friends with Pakistan. Instead, we should put a lot of time and attention into countries in Southeast Asia and the Middle East to make sure that we shore up those relationships, because they'll likely be somewhat more strategic for us. So we don't need to combat China in every single place that it decides to put money, time, and attention, but instead figure out where we have capacity and where we'll get the most gains by making sure that we invest well and that we compete fulsomely.
Jamil, I liked your rubric of strongest friend, strongest enemy. It's a little separate, though, from the idea of what we could be doing to prepare for today's international environment. What should we be doing that we're not doing right now?
Dramatically increase defense spending, prioritize potentially asymmetric capabilities and defenses against that, and offensive capabilities in that space. Cyber is an obvious one. Nuclear modernization. Right? Because at the end of the day, our nuclear, even though I agree with the prior conversation 2 panels ago, where it's unlikely we're going to use our nuclear fleet, right? The fact that we have one and that it's capable and deliverable is relevant to the international order. And not take our eyes off the very real fact that there are significant countries and significant non-state actors who mean us harm and who at the right time will take that opportunity. We have forgotten about the terrorist threat because things are calm, and for 20 years we've prevented a large-scale terrorist attack in this country. We are days and weeks away from another mass-scale terrorist attack. It would not be hard to pull off, and when it happens, everyone will be like, "Oh, well, what's going on there?" And there are nation states backing that play. I think the last piece of it is, and I'll say this because we're walking into an election year, Iran, China, and Russia actively benefit and are trying to stoke division in American politics. Until the people in this room and across the country recognize that part of the reason we're at each other's throats, there are very real divisions between us. But until we realize that us being at each other's throats is a direct result and a desired outcome of our adversaries, and we take actions to limit that toxicity, we will be failing and benefiting our adversaries.
Quick follow-up on the terrorist attack statement. It's the year 2000. This is something that Josh is very knowledgeable about. and you were to be on some version of this panel, you could talk about the bombing Kenya, the first 9/11, the first attacks on the World Trade Center, and of course the USS Cole bombing. What would you say are the signs or like the specific like actions or events or even actors that are driving your analysis there?
The terrorist attacks in Moscow, at the theater in Moscow, the purported threats against American former government officials here in the United States, Iran actively plotting to kill at least multiple U.S. government officials here today, the threats against concerts that we just heard about in the last week and a half, and the fact that our terrorist allies believe, our adversaries, pardon me, our terrorist adversaries believe that we've taken our eye off the ball because we have. We are not pressing them up, not anywhere, hardly at all. So they're gonna take advantage of that, and the nation needs to back them, as we saw. Oh, and by the way, let's not forget about October 7th, right? October 7th, on a population-adjusted basis, was the equivalent of a dozen 9/11s. So when we talk about what's happening in Israel and all of our qualms about how they're fighting Hamas and Gaza and all that stuff, let's just think about what would have happened if in the United States we had a dozen 9/11s happen on one day. And the war we'd be fighting, and the war we did fight for 20 years against Al-Qaeda. When we think about what Israel is doing today in Gaza. I'm not going to defend every bombing attack or the like, but just think about what a dozen 9/11s would have meant to us.
Josh, what should we be preparing for?
Well, I mean, we have over 100,000 Americans dying of fentanyl overdoses every year. So, if you want to talk about your dozen 9/11s with chemical precursors being shipped to Mexico from China, almost certainly deliberately. And so it sort of leads into a point that I would make, which is that when thinking about how our sort of high dimensional adversaries in nation state space are thinking, certain of their intellectual models, refer to things like concepts like win without fighting, win in these other spaces, win in this on this financial layer, win at the information layer, win at the chemical layer. And so, that's how I sort of think about this. I think about, the various places where conflict exists today, but essentially because we're living in this sort of like friend enemy type mind space, and no one has actually done something kinetic, even though outcomes that we're seeing are absolutely much worse than a potential kinetic incident. I just like to think of, what are the real things that we're trying to prevent? What are the real things that we're trying to promote? And then sort of think about the actual vectors where you can affect those types of things.
I think that's a great point. And I think to Josh's point, our adversaries, China in particular, are running the tables on us in those domains, in the information domain, in the if you want to call it the chemical domain, right? You're exactly right to raise both these points. And I think that's the secret that nobody's paying attention to.
Before we get to Meg and follow up, Josh, there was a moment for a quick few weeks there last, I believe, fall 2023, when there was a lot of talk of Mexico and the drug cartels and the fentanyl thing you just mentioned there. Now that we've moved past that, like, what are your broad thoughts, given the fact that you're illustrating the scale of 100,000 people a year, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I would just sort of make a list of what's killing Americans before they're, actuarially, likely to pass from natural causes, and just sort of think about that list and think about how to, return those people's lives to normalcy. And it presents a different set of priorities that I think is worth paying attention to.
What are we prioritizing right now that we should be prioritizing? What's something we're not prioritizing that we should be prioritizing, given what you just said?
Something I tweet a lot about is, I have this line that I tweet, how many foreign sabotage teams are operating on U.S. soil. And so I think a lot about that. And there's a very interesting case from a few weeks ago where there was an illegal immigrant who was caught at the perimeter of the house of a high-end special forces officer in North Carolina after dusk, 7, 8 p.m. at night. And the officer went out and confronted the individual. Some type of tussle ensued, and the officer ends up shooting the individual, who turns out to have been in the country illegally, Chechen, working for a very strange, go check out this company, very strange company out of the New York, New Jersey area, owned by people with questionable ties and supposedly contracting for telecom firms. I know nothing about this scenario, but if I were going to create a cover company to do covert action on U.S. soil, it would look a lot like that. And
there's multiples of those. That's not the only one.
This is happening all over the country. It's happening in very interesting places if you know where to look or know what it means. And so, to me, I think about internal security of the nation a lot. Right? Like, there are very specific places. I'm going to talk in huge generalities here. There are very specific places you can go in the country, and if you do very bad things, which you can do with some homemade materials, you basically bring the country to a halt. And I think that there are very likely people that know how to do that. I think those people are here illegally. I think they've been sent by foreign actors, and they're probably just like hanging out. And so if I think about, buying down risk for the American people, for the citizens of this country, that's where my head goes right away. And then obviously the fentanyl and the drug situation, there's a lot of domestic overlap with that. How do we prosecute, et cetera? How do we stop things from coming into this country? How do we stop people from coming into this country? But that's where my head goes.
Megan, what should we be preparing for?
So where my head is 95% of the time is thinking about what the U.S. is capable of doing in order to deter a Taiwan conflict scenario and how we need to best prepare for it. To deter, we need to be as strong in a number of areas as possible to basically convince the Chinese that if we choose to participate in such a conflict militarily, which I think that Xi has decided he wants to pursue, possibly much sooner than most Americans realize, which means we need to be prepared for this in the next year, not the next 10, 15, 20 years. We need to be convincing the Chinese today that they militarily will not succeed in this conflict. And so we need to be sending signaling mechanisms, as Jamil was talking about, in order to deter that conflict. And what we need to be doing domestically to make sure that happens is figuring out, one, what are the components of every single good we need and we believe we need for a protracted conflict to be able to sustain the warfighter throughout the length of whatever timeline we suspect we need to be involved. We need to know where all of the sourcing is, all of the duplicity in the sourcing is, to make sure that the moment China shuts down its economy, Raytheon, Boeing, and everyone in the entire supply chain, from critical minerals on up, is able to maintain that supply, because we have to assume they will shut down the delivery of all the things we need. And more than that, will likely do it for large swaths of the US economy. So we just have to be able to start preparing in a real way for figuring out what the heck that means for the US and likely for our allies that we want to say, come and be on the side of a free, non-authoritarian world. It's a flipping huge undertaking. And it really, really scares me when you walk from a briefing where people are pretty convinced this is going to happen and seeing how the administration, DOD, et cetera, will give a lot of lip service to believing this is happening, but not preparing for it in a real way. And I also want to say a shout out. I'm talking to a whole bunch of people in tech. I'm in tech. I really do worry that we may get the tech side right, at least theoretically, but Ukraine is showing us we need to have our arsenals ready to do things that we haven't really had to do in a big way since World War II. We rebuild very quickly in this country. I think we can get the nuts and bolts of ammunition ready very quickly. But honestly, we should be doing this now in a really, really robust way. And I think that tech can get involved in this. It's not sexy compared to a lot of like UAVs and different types of high-tech technology. But if we can get munitions right, we're able to deter a lot of stuff too. So I just make that plea. If you can figure out, much like Andrew was talking about, how we can make sure that we have the right capabilities, not just the things that like we theoretically think would be great in a high-tech conflict, have it from the low tech on up, and to get that right as soon as possible.
Follow up, something I wonder when I look at defense tech pitches, is the not contradiction, but the tension between the tight timeline we're on that you just articulated, and the fact that I don't think tech is ready to replicate, 1940s arsenal of democracy style things. So given the need that everyone's rhetorically embraced, I could see very few actors disagreeing with your point around like needing to be ready within the year. What do you think we can actually accomplish? And I'll ask this to everyone following up as well too. Like, what can we actually do within a short timeline period?
First of all, I think we do put the money towards critical mineral mining and processing as soon as possible in the US and allied countries. I worry about even putting it in some Southeast Asian countries where we think that those shipping lanes may be cut off. We at least get that going, because as long as we can start to stockpile, hopefully some of these things, some of the Trump folks that I used to talk to are actually optimistic that a lot of these things are not that technologically challenging. We know how to do some turnkey processing of critical minerals. We have the capability to do mining of most critical minerals and rare earths in the US. It's more of an EPA issue that we're not doing it, and some dirty stuff. We know how to do it cleaner now. A lot of the stuff we can build up quickly. A lot of the munition stuff we can build up very, very quickly, and we need to do it urgently. These aren't like 14-year projects. These can be 1 to 2 year projects. And honestly, SecDef needs to issue just a ton of orders that we can get around some like sticky regulations, especially on the environmental side. I'm very pro-environment. I don't want to lead to dirty tech, but we can do a lot of this stuff pretty clean. We just have to do, we need to get some waivers to do some permitting really, really, really fast. If I were, president for a day, I'd just get my SecDef to issue a ton of these. Weirdly enough, some of these are not a presidential authority. They're under a national security authority by the Secretary of Defense to do these waivers.
Jamil, what should we be doing over the course of the next year?
I think we should not be constraining ourselves. I think our biggest problem is ourselves, right? We are on the verge of massive innovation that you've heard about all day today, whether it's in quantum, whether it's in AI or the like, and yet we have become accustomed to deciding we need to constrain ourselves, whether it's the AI bill in California or the fear that we're running behind Europe because we're behind on tech regulation, or that we really need to constrain big tech because they're so mean to everybody. Look, I'm a big believer. I'm an investor in tiny tech, right? I think small tech companies are the critical linchpin of our economy and our innovation. But the idea that we would be hamstringing our largest, most capable technology companies because we think they're just mean and we don't like them, or they're mean to conservatives, is insane in an environment where we got to compete with China, right? It's insane in an environment where the Europeans think we're the enemy and not the Chinese, right? And so I think the biggest thing we need to do over the next year is get our heads right and get out of our own way. And a lot of that, to be candid with you, is here in my home state of California. We are the problem. We constrain ourselves. You all are innovators, and you all accept the fact that we should constrain ourselves. That is the wrong answer. Last night, Alexander Wang's on stage, right? And the question was, what's the white pill, right? And he said he didn't really have a white pill. He, had sort of another answer, right? My answer is, the white pill is we're going to win. We are on the verge of massive global transformative innovation led by American companies. Why are we resisting that? Why are we talking about, oh my God, let's figure out how to constrain ourselves? No, we should turn towards that, not run away from it. And when it scares me when you hear on this stage in this audience, you know, Lina Khan, she's doing the right thing. What? That is insane.
How is Lina? I mean, so if you're totally get if you're investing in traditional tech or you're talking about social media, thinking that Lina Khan is obstructing like that process, but how is Lina Khan obstructing in the context of, let's say, defense or the critical technology sectors that we're talking about that Megan referenced?
The Lina Khan philosophy fundamentally is not, hey, if you're a big player and you use your big player capabilities to oppress competition, then we'll come after you. That's just traditional American antitrust. That's what American antitrust has always been. That's what it is today. That's what it was before Lina Khan. That's what it'll be after Lina Khan. Lina Khan's theory is you get too big, we're going to come after you regardless of whether you're acting anti-competitively. Just being big and just being successful is the problem. That message that it sends to every small tech startup is, if you succeed and you do what we want you to do and you're amazing and awesome, we're coming after you too. That crushes innovation. That's bad for the American economy. That's bad for American leadership.
Thank you. Josh, what is your answer to the what should we be doing question?
Tariffs. Yeah, I think that if we want the American market to work, we have to protect it against folks that may exist in a state of military-civil fusion that are seeking to manipulate American and international markets, and that can be things like steel, it can be finished goods. But my old boss, President Trump, had I think I'm going to get this right because it just came out today, but he was like, 15% corporate tax rate for companies that exclusively manufacture in the United States. I think great policy ideas like that are what we can do to actually shape. I'm sure many people have seen here the charts of the provenance of semiconductors in the military-industrial complex, and how essentially there are very few, if any, major programs of record that don't have critical dependencies on Chinese semiconductors and or critical materials or minerals. And as much as we think that, and I agree with I think it's NEPA. I'm not sure. I think SecDef can actually provide exceptions, but it's NEPA. The problem is EPA. But we can try and fiddle in one place, but you just put market pressure, just 100% tariffs on things that we would prefer to have made in the United States. And it sucks in the short term, but ultimately I think that's how you're going to actually drive the American economy to rebuild these capacities that we're going to need in order to engage in high-end conflict.
Megan, something that's I think frustrating for me and everyone in this audience is the gap between the rhetorical urgency that no one and their cousin would disagree with and the actual actions that we're taking. You could put this in the supply chain category that you're very well familiar with. We could discuss this in the context of semiconductors and the struggles with the CHIPS Act implementation. As someone who worked in Congress, what's your theory of the case for what's going wrong here? Because I think all of your comments have been great, but we easily could have done this in 2022 on stage at REBOOT, and we could have said the same things, and 2 years later, here we are. So what's going wrong here?
I think we have a massive failure of leadership that comes from the president on down. We don't have and have not had a president who's willing to articulate who the bad guys are and who the good guys are. And when you can't name your adversaries and you won't develop a strategy where you can articulate the end game that you want to win, then you're never going to move the American people in that direction. You're never going to move Congress in that direction. And you're going to have piecemeal responses that lead to losing. I think we need an actual leader, and I'm very, very worried that we have not had one in a very, very long time. And we are going up against the toughest geopolitical challenge that we've had maybe as America. World War II, but we were pretty clear-eyed on who the bad guys were there. If we don't get this right, we just had a panel on the bringing up the next generations. I cannot sleep at night if we get this wrong. I will not leave that to our kids to deal with. And we have a fear in this administration right now, and the past one, of articulating what the end game needs to be with China, with Russia, with Iran. And we need to win. And I'm so flipping tired of being afraid to say that out loud. Why won't anyone say that out loud right now? Yeah.
I think you're reminding me of Ted Cruz, remember during the Obama administration, like President Obama, I'm not gonna do an accent, but he refuses to say radical Islamic terrorism. And obviously, like, I don't think it mattered that much. Like, that wasn't, I think, the actual issue. So it seems to me the problem for the spaces we're describing, though, is if Joe Biden or President Trump 2 or Kamala Harris 1 said China, 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 I don't think that would actually solve the problem. So what's that next step beyond just that?
The next step is actually, as I said before, articulating what an end game in this conflict needs to look like so that you can appropriately resource to meeting that end game, which means that you're able to articulate that a vision of, let's go with 2049, because China likes to talk about 2049. Has the CCP reached its objectives, and what has the US done to make sure that those aren't there? And is that a situation where the CCP does not exist in its current form? Quite possibly. Is that a situation where the CCP has, under the pressure of its own people and losses in military conflicts against, say, Taiwan, had to reform fundamentally so that the rights of its people are respected, and that it does not have expansionist objectives around Taiwan, but then also all through the second island chain? Yeah, I think it needs to be what our objectives look like. And I can go forth in a lot more detail, but I think it's a fundamentally different position than what we're able to say at the moment. Sorry, a lot of silence in this room at the moment, but
it's very somber. So that's a thing. Okay, so we have basically 10 seconds each. Jamil, you gave a white pill. Give us a black pill. And then Josh and Megan give us a white pill.
I don't know what these words.
Okay. Yeah. So China will invade Taiwan. We will do jack shit about it, and that will lead to the global demise of U.S. leadership in the world and authoritarianism spread across the globe. The allowing China to take Taiwan is the beginning of the end, and we are postured to allow that to happen. And they believe we will not defend Taiwan.
Megan, I appreciate how unonline you are. Basically, I'm asking, say something positive. Say something like positive that we should be excited about. Josh, what's something positive we should be excited about or optimistic around?
I mean, I think President Trump has a really positive vision for what to do for and in the country. And I think that he's an amazing candidate who did it last time. I hope he does it again. And so, I mean, you want a vision? The vision is make America great again. And I don't say that, no, I mean that. I don't say that as a political statement. I mean, if you want a North Star, it's like, how do we protect the American citizenry? How do we protect the American economy? And like, that's the focus, right? As opposed to like, well, I want the government of this country or that country to change. Like, well, governments are instituted among men, to what end? Let's think about that first, and then we can worry about how other people are, managing their affairs second. Important, but second.
Two things. I just have to respond to this. I think that the fundamental rights of people are upheld under the global world order that
which people?
The U.S. pushed forward, including Americans, and the most likely to have rights protected is under that. We implemented it imperfectly, but we got to design the system, and I want the continuation of the system that we got to design. As far as what I'm most optimistic, it's nothing to do with multipolarity or unipolarity. I am just really, really, really hopeful that AI is actually going to lead to really amazing breakthroughs on cancer research. I'm really, really hopeful. Cancer, understudied diseases, different things like that. So thanks.
Jamil, you wanted a last response.
I mean, let's be real, right? Kamala Harris does not have the right North Star for this country. Her North Star is wrong. Her North Star is collaborate with the rest of the world and they'll figure it out. But Donald Trump doesn't have a North Star either. Donald Trump's North Star is, let's take a poll what the American people want that'll make me look good at the end of the day. His North Star is not actually America winning. It's Donald Trump winning.
Jamil, he's been saying the same thing for 30 years on TV. The same thing.
One at a
He's had a
time,
single
one-
message
one-
for
one-
3
one-
decades.
one
One
at a
message.
Let's be real. Donald Trump is not leading this country. He's taking a poll to figure out what's going to make him look good. You want real leadership? It is not Kamala Harris and it is not Donald Trump.
I've never met anyone who cares less about polls than President Trump.
I'd ask some questions about TikTok policy, but we're gonna go to
That's
next.
a show.
We're gonna go to our next, and I'm gonna call it there. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for getting spicy towards the end, too, guys. This has been fun. Thank you so much, everyone.